all join me today for our introductory cooking class, the first one I've ever done online. I'm a little bit nervous only because I can't see you all and you're not all in the room with me, so it's a little different than any cooking class I've ever done before. But I just am very excited to share this menu with you guys today. We're all far apart, but we're all together, and I'm excited that I get to share this with you and you get to share it with the ones that you love in your own homes. So thank you for joining me today. My name is Samantha Down. If you don't know me already, I own Maid Marian's Catering based out of Esterhazy, Saskatchewan. And I moved here about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. So I'm excited to come back to kind of my own stomping grounds here in Esterhazy. I was based in Fort McMurray before this. I was a restaurant chef for about 5 years at a cafe in Fort McMurray, and I took all my training through Nate in Edmonton. So I'm a red seal chef, and I've been cooking for about 15 years. Actually, tomorrow is my 30th birthday, so if that dates me or not, I'm not really too sure, but I'm excited to be able to share this meal with you guys tonight. And yeah, we're starting now at about 4:30. I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to kind of get your stuff ready, and I'm going to go over kind of the equipment that we're going to need for our dinner tonight. So we're cooking a classic roast chicken with a pan gravy. We're going to make a mushroom parmigiana risotto, so a classic style risotto. We're going to cook that alongside our roast chicken with our gravy, and then we're going to cook a side vegetable. So my side vegetable tonight is broccoli. My daughter and my husband they could eat broccoli for every single meal, and it's so rich in vitamins and so many great things for your health. So I cook broccoli on a regular basis, and I'm going to kind of teach you kind of a secret onto how to get your broccoli that really perfect al dente, that really tasty and most nutritional way that you can cook it. So we're going to work with that tonight, but we're going to start with our chicken. So getting our ingredients ready, our mise en place, as we say in the cooking world, is kind of our setup. So we're going to cook our mise en place, get it all set up first for our chicken, and then we'll move to the risotto. And while the risotto is finishing up, we'll work on our vegetables. So to start, we're going to work on trussing the chicken. So the first things that I would say you should have handy are some paper towel or a nice absorbent towel that you'd like to use to soak up the juice on our chicken. You're going to want a nice roasting pan with something that can lift the chicken up. So in my roasting pan, I have a little grate that fits right in there. You can also use like a regular cookie sheet, as long as you have something that lifts that chicken up a little bit. That's what you want. Another method that you can use, which I love, is a Dutch oven. So if you're using a nice big Dutch oven, just making sure that you have something to lift that up so that the bottom of the chicken isn't touching the bottom of the pan is ideal. So those are the first things we're going to need, and I would suggest having a little bucket or a little bowl for your trim from your vegetables from the mirepoix, which is your carrot, celery, and onions, to hold on to so that you can make your own stock. So one of those, your roasting pan, of course a nice good kitchen knife. You don't have to have one quite as beautiful as this one, but any kind of 8-inch kitchen knife that's good and solid will work really well. We're going to need some twine to wrap the chicken up, so that's the trussing. So I have this one already trussed, but I'm going to take it all apart and show you how to do that. Other than that, you might want a clean kitchen towel at your side just to keep your hands nice and clean. But for the chicken, you need your roasting pan, some good paper towel, something to keep your veg trimmings in, and maybe some butcher's twine. If you don't have butcher's twine, you can also use a little twist tie just to hold the drumsticks together. That works really well. Or even you know, a good piece of twine or material that you can wrap around just the drumsticks. If you have a piece of butcher's twine, that's the best. Some chickens that you buy at the grocery store will already have the twine kind of around it, so you might not need to do this step, but it's very important to keep that uniform piece together, because unlike a roast, which is all kind of uniform or is already tied, a chicken has a lot of different pieces, so it cooks kind of unevenly depending on how big the legs are and how big the breast is. And that being said, this is a chicken that I bought from the Shop Easy at Esterhazy, so a pretty standard 3 to 3.5 pound fryer chicken. You might have a bigger chicken, organic chicken, free range chicken, like a Hutterite type chicken that you might have bought, which is great, even better, but it might have bigger breast size to thigh and leg ratio. So you're just going to want to watch the cooking time. So we'll kind of get into that as we cook this chicken. But whatever chicken you have, we're going to get it out. We're hoping that you guys saw the message earlier today to keep it to room temperature. If not, that's still okay if you're taking it right out of the fridge. We're just going to be very aware of how our cooking is. When you bring a chicken out of the fridge and bring it to room temperature, about 40 minutes to an hour before you cook it, what happens is when that meat is all at the same temperature, it goes into the oven and it cooks quicker, more evenly, and it browns better because it has had time to register its own temperature throughout. When it's cold in the fridge, different parts of the chicken will be colder, and then you just don't get quite as even of a cooking temperature. That being said, if you're taking it right out of the fridge, you can still cook it the same, you just might need a little extra time. I have you guys on my phone streaming live today. So I also have my laptop set up over on the left side here, so if you have questions and comments, I have the notification up there, so I should be able to hear you and ask them. If I miss any of your questions, I'm very sorry. I will try my best to get to them, but I did make some little guides over here to kind of keep you on point for anyone who's taking notes and maybe using this recipe later. But yeah, if you have anything that you want to ask me while we're going, feel free. I will try to get to you as much as I can, but we are going to start with this beautiful chicken, and first but not foremost, we need to preheat our oven. So I have a convection oven, so I like to use convection bake on my oven, and we're going to sear first. So we want to start that chicken at 450. So bring your temperature on your oven up to 450. You want to have your grate at about the second level, so kind of in the middle, so that that top of the chicken gets nice and evenly browned with the sear, so that it can retain all of that beautiful juice and flavor as we cook throughout the day. This chicken will take about, depending on the size, about 45 to 60 minutes. So we should be done our risotto, done our broccoli, everything should be beautiful, gravy should be done just before 6 o'clock. Depending on your size, you might be seeing a little bit longer, but we should all be eating around 6 o'clock. So I hope that you're all ready to go. We're going to start with this beautiful bird right here. So first and foremost, I always use a separate cutting board for any of my raw meat. So I have my beautiful green cutting board out here. I like to start by making sure that the chicken is dry. This is something that is maybe more of a trade secret than I realize, but having a dry piece of meat go into a sear makes all the difference in terms of the fat. So we're going to dry our chicken first. When we add our fat to it, that fat isn't going to fall off of a wet bird, right? So if there's still moisture on the bird and it hasn't been rinsed, of course, rinse it first if you haven't already. And then we're going to take that paper towel and we're going to try to dry the entire thing. So paper towel works really well. It is a little bit wasteful, so I don't always use a paper towel. I have my own special towels that I use just for drying poultry. But paper towel works really, really well. So if you have that, just taking the time to kind of find all those crevices and dry as much as you can. I always place one underneath and then one over top and just dry accordingly. Try to get a little bit into the crevices and inside the cavity of the bird, and just making sure that you get kind of all those pieces nice and dry, and you're all splayed out here. on your bird. So you got this beautiful bird, legs out, wings out. Now we're going to truss it all up. So you have your nice piece of butcher's twine, if you have it. If your bird is already trussed with the twine, you can just work on drying it and then we'll season it after. So with the butcher's twine, what you're going to do is you're going to find the middle piece. So nice equal length on either end, nice big, like, I don't know, probably meter long piece of twine, which is more than enough. We're going to take that piece and we're going to wrap it underneath both of the legs, drawing it back together and making a little cross over the legs and then wrapping it again underneath the legs. So the legs are nice and close together. And what you want is you're basically creating a nice even roast. When you have a beef roast, it's all kind of one length, and even if it isn't, you try to draw all those little flaps and pieces in so that you get a uniform piece, which is going to just cook more evenly. So once you got that kind of wrapped up around the legs, you're going to draw that around the wings. So the wings are nice and close together, and then you're going to come around the neck. Of course, with most chickens that we buy, the gizzards and giblets are removed. If they are not, and you have a homegrown chicken, you can cook it with the giblets in it. I like to take those and just add it to the bottom of my pan, and it kind of braises with the stock and the fat, and it'll make a nice gravy in the end. Most chickens come with the giblets removed, so if they're not already removed, you can remove them now. So we're going to wrap that around the wings. See, the wings are nice and tight and close in, and we're going to wrap it one more time around the legs. If you can, get right underneath the tail there, coming up on the end, and then wrap it around those legs and just tie yourself a nice double knot. If there's any left over, you can slice that right off. All right, so we got this nice bird. It's nice and even, and that's going to create a nice roast. So my favorite thing to do when cooking a nice bird evenly, it's one of my favorite things as a secret, is really easy to get that butter all across the bird, is take a brand new stick of butter. We'll use a little bit more butter later. I really rarely cook without butter. But if you have margarine, or even if you'd like to use a little bit of canola oil or vegetable oil to coat your bird, that is totally fine as well. I find that butter, because of its low smoke point, browns really well, and there really isn't much comparable flavor other than butter. So what I do is I take a little tiny strip off the end of my butter, so I have this little bit of butter, put it back on the butter paper, and then you just take that butter paper and you rub it all over the bird. So you don't have to have melted butter or room temperature butter, you can have cold butter. You can take a little bit of that butter, you can press some into the cavity, into the neck. Mostly you want to make sure that you're getting a nice coverage. Now, one thing that I always notice with these little birds is that even if you have a good oven and everything is done totally properly from the beginning, you always have these little areas that don't quite brown. So my secret to that is to use a little bit of pan spray. So we take our roasting pan, we're waiting on our oven to get to temperature. We've got our bird all nicely buttered up, and we're going to take a little bit of kosher salt or table salt. We're going to cover that bird in salt, and don't be afraid of salt. People should never be afraid of salt. You don't want to go too hard, but you want to make sure that that bird is evenly coated, because that salt is going to help tenderize the meat as it cooks. So we got the salt on. I don't typically add a bunch of herbs and seasonings to my chicken, and I'll tell you why. Because we're going to cook this chicken, and I'm sure that a lot of you don't have 8 people or even 4 people at home to eat all of this chicken in one night. So my thoughts behind seasoning the chicken lightly is that, you know, tomorrow or the next day when we go to make soup or chicken pot pie or anything like that, you want to be able to mix in new flavors to create a new dish. So if your chicken is cooked quite mildly with mild flavors, then it's going to translate into future dishes that are going to work really well. If you use a bunch of paprika and oregano and a bunch of stuff, then when you're cooking something different with the leftover chicken, you might muddle those flavors. So I like to try to keep it simple. So I just go salt, pepper, and butter, and we're gonna put that guy right on the pan. So because the butter is cold or not necessarily evenly coated, one thing I like to do is add a little bit of pan spray just to the sides and maybe just to the ends of the chicken, just to give it a little extra fat, a little extra coating, so that when it goes in the oven, it's gonna get that nice browning texture. So I'm gonna leave that back there because we're gonna wait until you hear the beautiful ding on my oven, and then it's gonna go into the oven at 450. You don't wanna put it in too early. You really want that high heat because that sear is gonna create that beautiful browning on your chicken. Then we turn it down and add stock and our mirepoix, and that's what's gonna bring the flavor. That's what's gonna keep that moisture in. So the sear is super, super important. So while we're waiting on the oven to come to temperature, we're gonna remove our chicken cutting board. Little hand wash here. I always keep a bleach solution for my tongs and my utensils while I'm working. That's 100 ppm bleach to water. And that just makes sure that as I'm moving and using my utensils, I don't have to wash them every time. I can dump them into the bucket and they will be sanitized. Of course, I use different tongs for my raw chicken to my cooked chicken, but other than that, it's just nice to be able to have that sandy bucket there while we're cooking. So, while we're getting ready for that oven, we're gonna get our mirepoix out. So, truss and dry, sear with fat, mirepoix is next. So, you can make your own stock. I make mine with all of my vegetable trimmings. So, I keep a little bucket here as I'm trimming up vegetables for soup or, you know, to eat raw vegetable platters or whatever I have. I keep a little stock bucket in my fridge every single day, and when I'm cutting up vegetables, I keep all those little miscellaneous ends to make my own stock. And a vegetable stock is really simple, really great way to enhance the flavor of soups, stocks, sauces, anything that you really use in the kitchen. Great for braising, great for cooking other meats. And it's really just as simple as having a nice bucket of those little trim veg, and you boil it in water, bring it to a boil, simmer it in water for about 30 to 40 minutes for a vegetable stock. I would go about an hour to an hour and a half with a chicken stock, but a vegetable stock is really nice to make, to have on hand. And so I made my own vegetable stock yesterday, so that's all ready to go to braise my chicken. So first off, we have celery, carrots, and onion. Classic mirepoix, French mirepoix, is 2 parts onion to 1 part carrots to 1 part celery. So depending on how big your chicken is, you're gonna want more or less mirepoix, depending on the size. The mirepoix really is there to just enhance the flavor. So this cut really isn't that important. I call it a chunky cut. And really all you're doing is taking off those leafy ends that tend to break down and make little bits in your gravy. Cutting off those leafy ends, put them in your stock bucket for the celery. You're gonna cut those all off, and then you're just gonna cut big chunks. You don't want it to break down too much, so if you cut it too small, it'll just break down and it'll kind of muddle your gravy. So you want nice big chunks. Carrots you can cut a little bit smaller because of course the carrots are gonna take longer to cook. So I cut nice big chunks of celery, and nice big chunks of the carrots. Of course, I always cut the ends off my carrots and add them to my vegetable stock bucket. And then I just cut nice chunky pieces of your carrots, add them all into here. For the onions, we're gonna cut the ends off. And then we're gonna rip that top layer off the onion. So you have your onion here. Taking off that fibrous exterior layer of the onion for your compost. And now this beautiful piece you could add to your mirepoix for your chicken. I like to break that piece up and add it to my stock bucket. So the stock bucket is really not just for garbage or trim, but the stock is really created by the quality of the ingredients you're putting in. So you don't want to just throw anything in there. When I trim my carrots and peel the edges off, I don't put the carrot peelings in there. I put the carrot ends off from an already peeled carrot. I trim all that excess layer off my onion ends, and then I put those nice fragrant onion ends in there. If you're just kind of throwing garbage into your stock bucket, it's going to make a muddly, cloudy stock, and it's just not going to be the best quality. So even though you're using up trim you wouldn't necessarily use for your final product, you're not just using any old thing. That being said, you can also use pieces of your broccoli stems, pieces of Brussels sprouts, even radishes, peppers. All of those things are going to enhance the flavor of your vegetable stock or your chicken stock. Might be a little bit different of a flavor. So if you want a more balanced, neutral flavor, onions, carrots, and celery are the way to go. Okay, so there's my temperature on my oven. I'm going to pop this chicken in there, nice and seasoned, nice and buttered. And we're going to set that timer for 15 minutes. Alright, so we're going to let that bad boy sear for a bit. And we're going to continue to get our mirepoix ready for our chicken. So, the chicken is a pretty neutral flavor. Poultry generally is very neutral, so it really takes on the flavor of whatever you're adding to it. So if you really wanted your chicken to have a more seasoned flavor, great poultry seasonings are thyme, rosemary, sage go really well, oregano of course, what I call hard herbs. Soft herbs would be like basil, perhaps fresh sage, which you can still add to the chicken if you want a more flavorful chicken. I just like to keep it nice and neutral with the mirepoix and the salt and pepper and a little bit of garlic, just so that I can reuse it in other dishes. So we're going to get that mirepoix ready. We've got our nice bought or freshly prepared stock. And we're going to let that chicken sear for about 15 minutes here. And then we're going to move on to preparing our mise en place for our risotto. So I'm going to add a little bit of garlic to my chicken, but if you do not like garlic or garlic is a little too strong for you, you might want to add just a little bit. I like to add 2 big cloves, and I don't even cut the cloves up for my chicken. I don't add it to the outside of the chicken, because what happens with the garlic cloves as it cooks on the outside of the chicken is it tends to brown really quickly. There's a lot of sugar and nutrients in garlic that will brown really fast. So I always add it either to the inside of the cavity or right with the mirepoix underneath the chicken to get the best flavor without that burnt garlic scent. So I like to just add 2 cloves, peeled and ready to go. And one thing that I do with my garlic, just to bring out the best of the garlic flavor without it browning too much, is I like to crush it just a little bit. So keeping those cloves nice and whole, removing all of the skin. I like to take my knife and just smash up that garlic a little bit, just releasing some of the oils from the garlic so that it cooks a little bit better in the mirepoix. Again, it's going to be covered in liquid, so it's definitely not going to burn while your chicken is cooking. All right, cool. It's really hard for me to see if you guys are commenting, so I'm going to come over here and just take a quick look, make sure that you're all good. I will recap, Leah, don't worry. Okay, let's recap. Chicken is in the oven. Browning with butter, salt, and pepper. We have our mirepoix of 2 parts onions, 1 part carrots, 1 part celery, and maybe a little bit of garlic if you would like. And we have I'd say about 2 to 3 cups of vegetable or chicken stock ready to go. So after that timer beeps, we're going to bring that chicken out. We're going to put the mirepoix underneath the grate, and then we're going to let it cook. We're not going to touch the chicken again for another 40 minutes, just about before it's ready to be out of the oven. We're going to take it out and we're going to baste it. So one thing that I find with people cooking turkeys and chickens a lot is that there's like unnecessary basting. I am really bad for this because I like to check on my chicken. I like to be active in the cooking process, but it's really, really unnecessary. And the more you open your oven, the more you're draining that heat every time. So we're gonna really try to not bother doing what it needs to do. We're only gonna baste it once, close to the end, just to retain that moisture a little bit, caramelize the flavors a bit, and you really don't need to open it too much. So, as this guy is cooking, we're gonna get working on our mise en place. Mise en place, a kitchen term that all of us chefs know, but a lot of wonderful home cooks are unaware of, but do all the time. And all it is setting up your necessary ingredients in the amount that you need so that once you're ready to add those ingredients as you cook, they're already portioned and ready to go. So your mise en place is just your setup. So for our mise en place for our chicken, we have our mirepoix, we have our stock. That's all we need. So that's going to be set aside, and we're going to get started on prepping the vegetables and stuff for our risotto. So talking about risotto, risotto is an Italian rice dish. Actually, risotto translates in Italian just to rice. It's typically served either as a first course before the main meal, or it is served alongside a very rich course. So with the chicken and gravy, or a ossobuco, which is veal in a gravy, a richer kind of main meal. It is cooked by a specialty method of really slow, cool, and collected, working with the risotto one scoop at a time. So you really get married to the risotto. So that's why we're cooking kind of a simpler accompaniment dish with our chicken and our broccoli or our vegetable, because we really take a lot of time hanging out with the risotto. So before we get to that point where we actually have to start cooking it, it takes about 30 minutes total to cook. We're going to start by working on that mise en place. So first and foremost, we have mushrooms. So we're working with a mushroom risotto. I have 3 big mushrooms, which is more than enough. It's really not the main part of the dish. The main part of the dish is the rice itself, which we're going to cook by a creaming method by adding the stock in very gradually. So if you'd like to add mushrooms, you can. If you do not like mushrooms, you don't have to add mushrooms. You can add just shallots and onions, or onions and mushrooms, or just onions and Parmesan and mushrooms, if you like. So I'm going to slice my mushrooms fairly thin. You don't want to cut them too chunky because they will drain out moisture as they're cooking. So the smaller they are, the better you can get a saute on them, which means that you're cooking at high heat and coating them in fat. So we're going to cut those up fairly thin. Nice little guys here, not big chunks. And really, as much mushrooms as you like. The recipe that we're using takes a cup of arborio rice. So that's about a 5 to 6 portion as a side dish, which is fairly generous. I'm cooking for 3 of us tonight, assuming that I will have leftovers. So a cup of arborio rice with mushrooms, Parmesan cheese, and onions is more than enough to serve 4 to 5 people. You can always double that if you're serving more. I'm guessing a lot of you probably aren't tonight, that you might just be a few of you. So we're going to work with that cup ratio, which is about 3 large mushrooms. Depending on whether or not you really like mushrooms, you can always add a little bit or a lot more if you would rather have it a little more mushroomy. It's totally up to you. So we're going to get those mushrooms cut up real nice, place them in front of us, and then we're going to work towards our onions. So you can use, I put onions on the ingredient list because onions are a little easier to find, although if you prefer shallots, we're a bit of a milder taste than a white Spanish onion, you can absolutely use those. And I'm going to kind of show you how to cut up that onion. So cutting the ends off. When I used to work at the cafe, I used to make, oh goodness, probably 70 liters of soup every day or close to it. I used to make a lot of soup. And so I cut a lot of onions and taught a lot of apprentices and training cooks on how to cut nice mirepoix. And like I always used to say to them, you know, something that stands out in a professional cook's realm as opposed to someone who's just starting out is their attention to detail with their cuts. So I'm going to show you my little way of cutting an onion. And I'm sure for a lot of you, this isn't really anything new, but it's always nice to practice your knife skills. Again, keep all those trimmed for your stock bucket. Our onion cut off on both sides, nice and clean. We're going to cut down the middle, and then we're going to take that middle piece. You really only need half an onion for this if you're using a 1 cup of rice recipe. Again, 2 cups of rice is going to give you like more than 10 portions. So I doubt most of you are cooking for 10 people, but if you are, we're going to double that to a full onion. But for us that are using 1 cup of rice, we're going to use half an onion. So we're going to cut these little pieces almost all the way down. So you're cutting almost all the way down. For most half onions, you'd want to cut about 3 little pieces. So you have those 3 little pieces from the top, cut open like so. And then you're going to place that flat side of the onion down, and you're going to cut across. Maybe 5 cuts. Then you're going to turn that onion perpendicular on your board, and you're going to cut across, making nice small dice all the way across your board. Beautiful. Simple, right? Now, one thing that, since we've been isolated, I haven't been able to get, which I really miss, is my contact lenses. I used to keep it a secret from all the apprentice cooks that the reason that I didn't cry when I cut onions was literally because I wore contacts. I think they thought that it was because I was like some all-star chef, or I had some like secret way of not crying. It literally is that I was wearing contact lenses and protect my eyes. Now that I'm wearing my glasses, I can totally feel how awful it is to have to cut onions. So take your time, we get our onions cut, we get our mushrooms cut, and we're gonna move on to a little bit of garlic. So I like to use fresh garlic, and for this recipe, you really only need 1 good sized clove. So get our good sized clove out, strip all those extra fibrous pieces off of there. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to cut off the ends so we don't have those big chunky pieces. I'm going to show you how to mince this up so that you get all the oils extracted out of it. So I know I got a big wide view here from where you guys are seeing, but if you can see my cutting board, all I'm doing is slicing these into little thin slices, and then I'm just going to mince them up. So just mincing it up as much as I can. We want to be able to coat as much of the rice with garlic so we don't have big chunks in there where some pieces, some bites are garlicky and some are not. But it's really, really hard to get it nice and minced just on your own. So once you've got it cut up semi-fine, take a tiny little bit of salt, put that over top of your garlic on your cutting board, and then take the side of your knife and run that salty garlic back and forth along your cutting board. And if you are doing this, you can see that the oils are beginning to release and it's beginning to press out. Now, I've been told for years, I don't know how many people have told me that they want to buy me a garlic press, and I just laugh hysterically because I'm like, no, I don't need a garlic press because I can use my knife. But if you have a garlic press and you like to use it, it works essentially the same. I like to add that little bit of salt there because it extracts the oils from the garlic and gets it all nice and ready. So there we go. We've got our cup of arborio rice, we've got our garlic, our onions, and our mushrooms. So the other thing that we have is our parsley. So I buy parsley by the big bag, and I dry my own parsley. I like to use dried parsley as a garnish just because it's kind of messy to cut up, and I always buy it in big bags, so I always have dried stuff on hand. So you can use either dried or fresh parsley. Either way, if you have dried parsley by the leaf, you're going to take those leaves off, put them right into your bowl, and take those beautiful stems and put them in your stock bucket. Parsley stems are actually really rich in vitamins and also really rich in flavor and are great for your vegetable stock because they're fairly neutral. They're not going to add like a really diverse flavor to anything that you're making. They're just going to kind of work really well with the aromatics from the vegetables that you're already putting into your stock. So grabbing a little bit of that parsley, if you have it fresh, removing those stems, placing that parsley on your cutting board. You're going to mince it up as much as you can, getting it nice and even. This is another reason why I like using dried parsley because it's very simply, you can crush that parsley up and it's really easy to spread out as a garnish. But fresh parsley does have a little bit fresher and tastier effect. So whatever you have will totally work. Beautiful. The other thing we need is our Parmesan. So before I put this recipe out, I went and checked to make sure that Shop Easy and the Big Way had all of these ingredients. So it is very important that you have arborio rice. If you do not have arborio rice, the starch is not going to work the same for the risotto. A risotto is absolutely defined by the use of arborio rice. So I knew there was some there, so I'm hoping you guys all have it. We're going to work with that rice, and it does not need to be pre-rinsed, pre-boiled, or anything. It comes exactly like that, and the reason for that is that the starches are going to release slowly as we add the stock, which is going to create that creaminess. So one of the other things that we had on the recipe index was cream. So it's not absolutely necessary to add the cream to your risotto. I like to add the cream at the end just because I feel like it really brings out all of the flavors of the cheese and the onions, and because we're not adding cream to our chicken or to any other parts of our dish, you know, you're not sacrificing that richness. So you really only need a little bit of cream, but if you'd like to go creamless, you absolutely can. We don't add it till the end, so I just have it over by the cooking station here, and we will measure that out when the time comes. All right, so our chicken seems to be nicely roasting. If you put yours in a little bit later, that is a-okay. We are going to bring that chicken out and take a look at how the roasting went with the sear and make sure that it's nice and evenly browned. So here we go. We have this beautiful bird here. It's beginning that nice browning. Now, my chicken didn't quite brown all the way across, and that's pretty typical, just because ovens have different hot spots throughout. So it started browning really nice. What I'm going to do to help that browning come along as we move throughout the cooking process is I'm going to add a little bit of that pan spray, my little secret kick, just to those back parts that maybe didn't get quite browned up. Just a little extra fat there to help it brown. Beautiful. So we have this beautiful bird starting to brown, dry in the pan. Next up on our list is to add that mirepoix to the bottom of the pan. We're going to take that little roasting sheet out. We're going to take our mirepoix, place it at the bottom of our pan, nice and even. And then we're going to add the veggie stock. I'd say to start with about 1.5 cups, something like that. My sister is commenting that she's always thinking about her mise en place. Good for her. She just graduated culinary school, so she better be thinking about her mise en place. All right, so about 1.5 cups in there. You don't want that liquid to be touching the bottom of your chicken. So depending on how big your grate is or how big your chicken is, you want to make sure that's nice and even along the bottom of your pan. Then you're going to take that chicken with the grate and place it right over top. So you got your chicken above the liquid. That's going to create steam, and we're going to keep this uncovered to promote browning throughout the cooking process and also to release that steam and flavor. We're not opening the oven a lot, so it's going to keep that moisture inside. Really, there's no need to cover your chicken throughout the cooking process, just because you're going to promote more sogginess in the chicken by covering it. You can cover it. There are lots of good healthy recipes in covering the chicken and promoting that inside. If you were using a Dutch oven and your chicken was very brown, you might want to cover it. But for our purposes today, we're going to leave it uncovered. We're going to take that oven and we're going to put it at 325. And we're going to put that chicken right back in with the nice mirepoix underneath, the liquid underneath, maybe a couple cloves of garlic if you like. And whichever way you had it turned to begin with, turn it the opposite way. Just because everybody's oven cooks a little differently, has its own hot spots. So we're going to try to bolster that as best we can. Hi. My husband is in here distracting me, and I really wish he wasn't, so I'm going to wait until he leaves. I'm not really sure what he's looking for. All right, cool. So we're going to keep this roasting pan over here for later. Just a little pan to take our chicken off when it's time to let it rest, so that we can make the gravy out of the same roaster that we were using with our mirror pot. So while that's all going down, we're going to get our station ready, making sure that we have all those nice ingredients because we're going to start our risotto. So starting the risotto, there's a couple things that we need to be aware of. One of which is that we want all of this mise en place to be ready because we are married to that risotto for the next 30 minutes or so. You can take little breaks in between. So before we start, we're going to actually prepare our vegetables for when we cook our vegetable side. So like I said before, my family loves broccoli. So I'm going to cook broccoli. And one thing that I see with people all the time is that broccoli is a little bit trickier of a veg. Once you know how to cook it, you will never eat it the same again. People tend to overcook and steam their broccoli, and it becomes mushy, and it's just not ideal. So today we're going to take a little bit of extra time to cook out those broccoli florets, and the way we're going to do that is through blanching, shocking, and then sauteing. So to start off, we're going to cut the little ends off our broccoli heads here and remove all those pieces. Try and create even pieces as much as we can with as little big chunks of the stem as possible. So those big chunks of the stem, I throw that right into my stock pile. I really like the broccoli stems. It adds a lot of nutritional content to my stock and it makes it really, really green. If you're looking for a more plain stock, a more clear stock, you wouldn't want to add those broccoli pieces. So maybe if you're making a white sauce or you're making a cream soup and you don't want it to be too green, you wouldn't add that. But for my everyday purposes, for making gravy and basting different types of meat and braising, I like to add the broccoli ends to it because it's just nice and adds a little nutrition and color. So you can add those to your stock if you like, and then just separating those pieces of the broccoli florets so that they're all generally the same size. So if you like them smaller, you're going to cook them for less time. If you like them nice and chunky, you're going to cook them a little bit longer. So we're just going to get that ready, cut them all up. Of course, clean your broccoli or your Brussels sprouts first. If you're using Brussels sprouts, you'll want to take the edges off of the Brussels sprouts, so those first few leaves, cut the end off so it's nice and clean on the inside. Again, rinse them before you use them, and then we're going to put them on the side. So we got our nice clean broccoli over here for later. Beautiful. All right, so if your veg is ready on the side, your mise en place is ready for your risotto, we're going to get started cooking that risotto. So first things first, butter. So I like to take about a tablespoon of butter for about a 1 cup rice portion. We're going to use a little bit more butter at the end. You can use olive oil. It's very traditional to use butter or olive oil for the sofrito. So the sofrito is taking the melted butter, the onions, and mushrooms in our case today, and sweating them down until they're a little translucent, and then adding our rice and coating it in the fat. That's going to coat all of the pieces of the risotto first, so that when it cooks out, you still maintain that little bit of al dente while it's still creamy and kind of one mass. You don't want it to be porridgey and kind of all strewn together. If it gets to that point, it's been overcooked. But the biggest way we can avoid that happening is by creating the sofrito and coating that rice to begin with. So we're going to heat up our pan nice and hot and melt our butter. Melt our butter, and then we're going to add our onions, and then our mushrooms, and then our garlic. The Parmesan and the cream and the parsley are going to wait till the end. So we're going to melt that butter down. One thing I like to do when I'm working with straight butter, just for my own sanity, is I like to add a little bit of canola oil or vegetable oil to the butter, and that's just going to keep the butter from browning. And there's not that there's anything wrong with a brown butter, or a beurre noisette, as we would say. It just is a different, more complex flavor, and here we're really just trying to make that nice translucent butter-coated onion. We want it to remain sweet, and because we're going to cook for a long time with the risotto, we don't want any of that bitterness. So I like to use a little touch of oil over my butter to protect it. Oil always has a lower smoke point than butter. Butter's smoke point is higher because of its fat content, which makes it really tasty, but it tends to burn really quickly. So adding a little bit of oil there is going to help protect our butter. So another thing that is really important when we're looking at sauteing would be cooking something at high heat in a hot pan, right, quickly. So when we're sauteing, we want to keep that pan at a nice hot heat. And I see this so much, is people will turn their pan on, turn it to low, and add everything right away, and then cook. And what happens when you do that is you're releasing all of the moisture, the natural water that's in your vegetables, and you're basically ending up boiling them. So there's no Maillard reaction. So Maillard reaction is just a fancy way of saying browning and caramelizing. And what's happening is when the heat hits the outside of the vegetable with the fat, it's basically creating a reaction where it browns on the outside. So you get that really sweet, tasty, oniony smell, and it's a lot more flavorful, and you get that nice browning, which creates a more well-rounded dish. Whereas if you're boiling it out, you're going to lose that moisture content, and especially with something like risotto, where you're consistently adding stock, so adding moisture, you don't want to create too much moisture. So that being said, a traditional risotto recipe wouldn't necessarily use mushrooms, but lots of risotto uses mushrooms, and therefore we're going to adjust our stock portion. Because we're adding mushrooms, it's going to add to the moisture. So we're just going to cook it, a couple mushrooms, half a cup of onion, and our garlic, and we're just going to add that stock slowly. So this recipe is about 2.5 cups of stock to 1 cup of rice, but we might not need all of that depending on the mushrooms. So we're just going to kind of cook it out, and because risotto takes a little bit of time, we're just going to see how it goes. Kind of like how cooking is. A lot of the time, you just kind of have to see how things go and adjust accordingly. So once we've got that nice and hot, you throw a little water in there, you know it's ready. If it sizzles, you should hear that beautiful sound of the onions hitting the pan. So another big thing that I always say when you're cooking, regardless of what you're cooking, it's important to season throughout. So salt is a huge part of what we do in cooking, not only because it adds flavor, but it also changes the structure of the compounds, the proteins, the sugars, in every vegetable, every meat that we cook. So if you say that you can cook without salt, it's not really true. You need salt to cook. It's necessary to cooking. You can definitely cut the salt in lots of recipes, just like you can cut the sugar in lots of recipes. But what salt does for the vegetables, for the meats, is not something that you can create with anything else. So you may be able to create flavor through different seasonings, lemon and paprika and all sorts of stuff, but you'll never get the essence of what salt does to food. You have to use salt. So I always like to season my vegetables right at the beginning, just a little bit, and then I'll taste again, season again, and then taste and season at the end if I need it. So a little bit of salt to begin with. Get those onions so they're starting to caramelize a little bit. So see that nice browning there? They're starting to get translucent, but they've got a little bit of brown to them. And if you were here, or I'm sure you are at home, you can smell that lovely smell of the sugary onions. We're going to add our mushrooms now and do the same thing. So keeping that at a nice high heat. You don't need to add any more butter here. You can just let those mushrooms start to cook out. And the mushrooms and the onions, of course, will continue to cook out as the risotto cooks. We want to kind of break them down a little bit first and get that caramelizing flavor going as we're cooking. So once the mushrooms have cooked for a minute or two, then we can add our garlic. We don't want to add the garlic too soon because the garlic will brown really quickly and it'll burn, and that'll create a very bitter risotto, a very bitter dish in the end. So it's important to wait a little bit longer to add that garlic. Again, if you like to add any other seasonings here, if you want to add oregano works really well. You know, a classic risotto Milanese would have saffron in it. But I like to stick with something pretty basic, pretty simplistic, just so that you can get the richness of all of the flavors there that are already there. You don't really want to muddle a bunch of flavors in there, but if you like something a little more powerful, or there's a specific flavor that you really like, you can go ahead and add that to your pan while you're sauteing your onions and mushrooms. All right. So our mushrooms have gotten a little bit of coating. I'm going to let them go for another minute here. And then we're going to go ahead and add the garlic. And then we'll add our rice and we will coat it. And then we get to sit here talking about how much we love risotto and slowly add our stock. So again, that stock, this one I made yesterday. It was about 30 minutes. I just take my stock bucket of nice clean trim, onions, a little bit of broccoli, carrots, celery, that's how I like mine, or just celery, onions, carrots, maybe a little bit of parsley stems, and I just put it in a pot, fill it with water, just covering the vegetables, and then let it come to a boil, and then simmer it for about 30 minutes. And then strain out all that veg, and you have a wonderful vegetable stock. If you bought stock, that is okay too. We're going to use about the same proportion. And one thing with bought stock, though, I always note, is that it tends to be a little bit stronger. So just be aware that if it is a little bit stronger, you might want to cut it with a touch of water. But if you like it nice and strong, chicken or vegetable flavor, you can keep it just as is. All right, so we browned this a little bit. We're going to turn that down to about medium-low heat, and we're going to add our garlic. So being aware here that our garlic will burn if we're not constantly moving it around. We want it to coat as much of the vegetables as we can, getting that nice garlicky flavor throughout our brown veggies here. Getting that nice browning with the fat and the salt and the loveliness. And then we're going to turn that right down to low, and we're going to add our rice. So you have your cup of rice, unrinsed, straight out of the bag. We're going to add it right to our mixture. So it's still nice and hot in the pan. We want to cover that rice up. So here you could add maybe a drizzle of olive oil or a little touch of butter if you want a better coating. I'm going to add a little bit of butter at the end, and I had lots of butter in my pan, so I'm not too worried about it. You don't want it to be too fatty. You just want it to be covered just enough so that all those little rice pieces get a little bit of coating of that flavor first in our nice big fry pan. There. So once those are kind of toasty a little bit, not too much. I have propane at my house, so it cooks really hot. So it might take me a little less time if you have natural gas or a regular electrical stovetop. So just be aware that you might need a little extra time to gauge when this rice is done. So once you have that rice nicely coated, we're going to begin by adding just 3 or 4 tablespoons of our stock. So chicken stock or vegetable stock in there. Beautiful. So now all we're doing here is allowing that rice to slowly soak up the liquid from the stock. It's nice and coated, so it's going to retain its shape, and the stock is going to slowly penetrate the flavor of the rice. So there's barely any liquid in there, and we're going to wait a couple minutes, and once it is basically gone and you can't see any liquid in the pan, so tipping it just slightly. See, there's still a bit of liquid there. And kind of carry over that liquid, let it reduce a little bit, and then we're going to add a little bit more liquid, a little bit more liquid, a little bit more liquid. So, while we're waiting on our risotto and it's cooking up really nice, I'm going to take a look here and see if there's anything that I missed. But as your risotto is cooking, you really want to keep an eye on it because that moisture can dry up fast and we don't want to burn the rice. Yes, the chicken is uncovered. I would not cover the chicken if you have a good roasting pan. No, there's no rice there's no broth in the pan before the rice is added. It's just butter. It's just the vegetables and a little bit of salt. So now that our rice is added, I would add a little tiny bit more salt just to promote that cooking process. The salt, again, doesn't just add flavor, it is contributing to the cooking and the texture of the overall dish. So that goes with your vegetables, your meats, your rice, your pasta, anything really. There are very few places where I wouldn't salt my water first before boiling, blanching, sauteing, steaming. There are very, very few instances where you wouldn't need salt. I like to just salt a little bit at a time, and as we get to the point where we're going to taste it, you're going to see how much that is translated. So you don't want to go too much, but a little at a time is going to help incorporate into the dish. So we are letting that cook out. As soon as we see that the moisture is coming out of the pan, which mine is, we're going to add a little bit more. So this is a liter here. So this is a little bit more than I should need for the entire dish. But it really depends. It depends on the size of your pan. It depends on how fast it cooks. So again, like I said, my propane burner, especially this particular burner, cooks at a very high heat. So it might be a longer period of time for you before you add your stock. Just be aware that you don't want it to dry out. You want it to continue to be moist, but you don't want to drown the rice. So we're not boiling the rice, right? Most rices, jasmine, basmati, converted rice, you would bring the water to a boil, add your rice, maybe salt and butter, and then you would cover it and let it steam out. So all that liquid is incorporated and then it steams out the rice. With risotto, you're working with the starch. So you're trying to create a creamy texture without necessarily adding cream. Today we're going to add a little bit of cream, and that's just mine personally. I like to add a little bit of cream to pretty much anything I can get away with because I just like the flavor and I think it bolsters all of the things that are already in it, and our overall dish isn't super heavy. So I'm going to add a little bit of cream at the end. But a true risotto doesn't have any cream and will be creamy based on our method of cooking. So that's just continuing to, it seems like a labor of love because it is. Continuing to stir. And again, if your burners cook a little bit lighter in the heat, you might want to turn it up to a low to medium heat, just so that every 5 minutes or so, you're cooking off that liquid, it's almost drying out, and then we're adding more moisture, right? So a little bit of moisture at a time, allowing that to incorporate, slowly bringing out the starch of the risotto. Okay, I'm just making sure. I have to come all the way up here to make sure I can see your comments. I apologize. So, this is my little guide for you. I hope you can all see that, of what we're doing with our chicken. So, if you are not cooking today and you're taking notes, the biggest takeaway I would say is to write this down, because basically any whole bird, other than duck, I would cook the same way. Truss with a dry, sear with fat, add your mirepoix and stock, roast for 325, one baste, and then I'm going to show you at the end how to carve that chicken. Ah, yes, I can bring the pan to you. I have a tripod set up for my camera, so I will bring the pan to you. So this is what it looks like right now as it's cooking out. So see at the bottom of the pan, there's not much moisture. I'm about to add more moisture. So there's all those mushrooms, garlic, onions, a little bit of brown happening, but the thing that isn't browning is the rice. You want that rice to continue to soak up the moisture. So So you have that beautiful sofrito cooking into the rice. We're going to bring it back to the heat. And again, because we're married to the stove for a bit, we're going to add some more of that stock. So just a little bit at a time, you know, really working with no more than a 1/4 cup of stock each time you add it, just to coat the rice. Just enough, shaking out our pan so it's nice and even, and it's going to continue to cook down. And this is a very traditional style of how to cook this. I know there's lots of fail-safe ways of cooking it in a Dutch oven, adding all the liquid at once so you can walk away. And I've tried those and they work okay, but I've never found anything that works quite as well as the traditional method of staying right by your pan and continuing to add that liquid as you go. So I didn't time my chicken before. I said about 40 minutes cook time after the sear, but I don't time my chicken or my turkeys ever, just because each one of them cooks so differently depending on how hot your oven can get and how big the chicken or the roast or the turkey is. So I have a kind of mental gauge that at about 10 minutes from now, we're going to bring it out, we're going to baste it, we're going to turn it around, we're going to kind of check it and see how it's going. It should be done at about, I'd say about 10 to 6. 5 minutes rest outside the pan, which is when we'll make our gravy, and then we can carve the chicken after that. It's very important that we have that rest time to allow all of that moisture that we created by cooking the chicken with the mirepoix stock to stay in the chicken. We really don't want to lose all of that moisture by cutting into it right away. One thing I see with people a lot is as soon as that steak comes off the grill or pork chop comes out of the pan or chicken comes out of the oven, we're cutting into it right away, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the sear and the slow cooking time. Is that we really want that chicken to rest, to let all of those flavors meld in together, and then we're going to carve it. So just taking a look at our pan here, there's still a little bit of moisture, so we're going to let that cook out, making sure that all those little ricey's get in there. And while we're waiting here, we're going to get our pot ready to cook our veg. So I like to use a nice braising pot. So it's a little bit wider, but not as high as like a big soup pot. So I like to use one of these pots and just fill it about 3/4 full of water, depending on how much veg you're using, and bring it to a boil. So like I said before, salt. So for this much water to the amount of broccoli I'm cooking, which is really just one big broccoli head, which would be more than enough to serve my 3 people at dinner tonight, I'm going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of salt to my water. So one of the reasons that we add salt to water obviously is for flavor. The other thing about cooking vegetables in salted water is that it adds to the nutritional value. I know that's probably different than what you would naturally come to mind. Adding salt to things doesn't seem like it would make more nutritional value, but I'll tell you that if veg is cooked in unsalted water, the water extracts the natural sugars and salts from the cells of the vegetable, and you lose that nutrition. Whereas if the water is salted, more of these compounds stay inside of the vegetable. It also speaks to the color. So you can see when we blanch the veg as opposed to steaming it or boiling it or frying it or any of that. With broccoli, which needs a little bit extra time in the water, say than onions, which can go right in the pan, you want to make sure that you blanch it first in boiling water. So we have our pot, we're going to bring it to boil, we've got about 1.5 teaspoons of salt in there, and we're going to let that come to a boil, and then we're going to add our nice pre-cut veg. So looking over here at my risotto, it's starting to get a little dry. Perfect time to add more liquid. So as you can see, as we're cooking here, it's starting to get a little bit bigger. So that rice is starting to expand, the starch is starting to come out, and that starch is going to contribute to that creamy texture that is typical of risotto. So different than another rice, like a converted rice or a jasmine rice or a basmati rice, which you're trying to separate the starch from the grain. You want to incorporate the starch into this dish so that it becomes one mass, but at the same time is al dente enough that if you're hungry for a million of one thing, you can still have that. So risotto is its own special dish for that reason, right? It's the best of both worlds. It's creamy and rich, but at the same time, you still get that rice component, you still get that added starchy component, and it's just a really, really nice, rich way to add flavor as a side dish, and it's really worth the effort. There's not a lot of things that really resemble a risotto, in all honesty. It's kind of its own dish and a classic dish for a reason. So when you get it right, it really turns out really wonderful, and you're going to really enjoy that end product. So getting ready for our end portion of our risotto, which is a little ways off, I have my shredded Parmesan and my parsley and my whipping cream. So I use a heavy whipping cream. The high fat content is going to contribute to being consistent with the rice. So when you cook out with high fat as opposed to just milk, you're not going to get that separation. The fat is going to meld in together and you're going to get a nice creamy consistency throughout. So really important that you use a heavier fat cream if you're going to use cream. Again, you can add more stock at the end instead, and you're still going to get a creamy type risotto, which is very traditional, but you don't have to add the cream. You're just going to need a little bit more water or stock. So when we were coating the grains there, I forgot to tell you, that's called a tostada. So it's covering each grain in an individual amount of fat, and then that fat is absorbed and gradually releases the starch for that textured creamy mass. So that beginning part where we kind of sweat the grains with the fat and the onions and the mushrooms is really, really integral to the overall dish. So if we just added everything all together, poured our stock in, you're not going to get the same consistency. It's going to all come together as kind of a polenta more than a risotto. So it's really important that we kind of do that saute first, do the sofrita, do the tostada, and then eventually slowly add that stock. So it really does make a difference. All right, so we're at about 5:35. We got the water boiling. I had added more stock to our risotto. The risotto is cooking out a little bit. We're going to keep an eye on that. I'm going to take out this beautiful chicken, and we're going to just take a look at it and see if it needs a little bit of a baste, see how well it's cooking, and see how much time we might have on that. So just checking our risotto, making sure it's not drying out, our water's not boiling. So let's take out that chicken for a minute. Oh, yes, wearing my glasses has its downsides. Oh my goodness. Look at that beautiful bird. Nice and browned on top. I'm missing a little bit of browning on the side, so as my cheat method, I'm going to add a little bit of, just because I want it to be nice and brown. So the top is nice and brown. It's looking really good. We have it nice and uniform with our truss. I can tell that it is not quite done. And to promote that browning on the bottom, we could flip it over, but because I'm going to carve it all, and I'm going to slice off that top layer of breast meat, which is what my family likes, I'm not really concerned about the overall browning. The rest of my chicken is going to be used for a chicken soup later this week, so I don't need the bottom to be brown. I just need it to be evenly cooked. So I really like where it's at right now. I'll bring it a little closer so that you guys can take a look. You got that nice browning happening on top. It's looking real good. Oh, do you warm the liquid? Yes, you can. It will help cook it quicker. I don't warm my liquid just because I don't think it makes that big of a difference, Donna. You can though, absolutely, and typically you would. You would have it kind of warmed on the side. My propane stovetop cooks really hot. So I've done it both ways and I haven't found that it makes a big difference. So I just skip the step of heating up the stock. But yes, traditionally you would heat the stock in a pan and slowly add it. You don't really need to though. Okay, so taking a look at that risotto, it's starting to dry out again. It's getting closer, nice and thickening. We're gonna add a little bit more stock here. And let that cook out a little bit longer. Make sure that those little rice bits are coming off the side of the pan. Nice and even across. Beautiful. Okay, so we have this beautiful chicken. It looks gorgeous. We're happy. We're loving it. We're getting hungry. I'm gonna baste it a little because I like to baste. You know, you really don't have to, but I just like to baste. It's just fun. So I'm gonna suck up some of that liquid. A little bit of a tilt in my pan so I can suck that up. And I'm just gonna coat, especially those parts that aren't quite browned yet, just a little. I don't know why. I think it's maybe because growing up on the farm with my grandma, you know, it was like we timed the basting, and the basting was a thing we did. And I know technically it's not really necessary, but there's something satisfying about having a baste. So I basted it one time. All right, I got my one baste in. I can see that there's still pink liquid coming out of the chicken, so that's a good sign that it still isn't cooked yet. So we're gonna take that back, we're gonna put it back in the oven, turn it the opposite way. We're gonna continue to cook that up. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, so our risotto is cooking. Our water should be almost at a boil. And while we're waiting, we can get our slurry ready for our gravy. So slurry, in my opinion, works better than flour. One, it keeps all of the chicken gluten-free. So if you're concerned about adding any gluten, you really don't need to add flour. You can though. There's nothing wrong with a flour roux-based gravy, but I prefer to use a slurry because a slurry using cornstarch is a much faster, more convenient way to thicken any sauce or gravy. It has a thickening power of like 5 times what flour has. So the amount of actual flour you have to add to get the same thickening power is just so much more. With a slurry, you really don't need very much at all. So it's just easier, faster, keeps it gluten-free, and with a roux, you have to be careful not to burn it, and you also have to be careful with the roux because you have to cook it out for longer, just because of the starchy content of the flour. So we're gonna add about, I don't know, like a teaspoon and a half to a bowl. And then we're gonna add about double of that of cold water. So I like to keep them separate until I'm just about ready for my gravy. So important when you're making a slurry, a cornstarch slurry, that you add cold water. So the colder the water, the better it is. The reaction between the cold water slurry and the hot gravy is really important. So we're gonna bring our gravy eventually to a simmer and then add the cold slurry. It reacts to the slurry differently than if you add warm water to warm stock and gravy. It's going to react differently. So it kind of shocks it into thickening quicker. So I always have cold water, cornstarch on the side there. And we'll get ready to add that. All right, so our risotto is getting cooked out. This would be the opportune time to give it a little bit of a taste. Whenever I'm wearing my chef jacket, I always have like 6 spoons tucked in here, so it's a little weird that I don't have that here with me. Grab a spoon. I'm going to take a little bit of just the rice, really. Starting to taste awesome, but it's not quite there. So I'm going to do one more addition of stock. So I did end up using basically a whole liter. So it really just depends. I mean, I've done this 100 different ways, and every time I do it, sometimes it's less stock, sometimes it's more. It really just depends on how much liquid is being evaporated from the pan. So I just always keep extra on hand. But you can always add water. You can always add a little bit of water. You might want to adjust for salt. I never add salt to my homemade stock, so I can add salt freely as I'm cooking. If you buy even a low sodium bought stock, it's going to have salt in it. So just be aware of that when you're seasoning. And if you run out of stock, you can always add water. You just want to get it to that nice creamy consistency. So right now I tasted it. It needed a little bit more stock. It definitely needs a little bit more salt, but not too much. So we're going to add a little bit more salt in there. And as I can see, my water is about to boil. So I took a little check there on my risotto. It's looking good. It needs a little bit more time. So I'm going to move on to my vegetables. So again, You can do this with Brussels sprouts, carrots, anything that's fairly fibrous as a vegetable. I'm using broccoli just because it's our favorite, and I cut it into those nice florets, nice and uniform, and I've got my boiling salted water here. So what this is what I call blanching. It's essentially simmering, but with broccoli especially, you don't want to overexpose the broccoli to high rumbling heat, right? So if it's boiling really rapidly, you might want to turn it down because it'll start to break up the outside parts of the broccoli. So mine's just at like just a basic boil, and I'm going to turn it down a little bit, and I'm going to add that broccoli to it. There's just enough water in there to kind of cover my broccoli. I'm going to take this guy out. In the kitchen we call this a spider. I don't know what else you call it, but I call it a spider. And I'm just going to make sure that that broccoli, which is going to come to the top, is just covered by the water. And we'll probably take about, depending on the size, mine are about medium, chunky size, so probably about 3 minutes in there, and then we're going to shock it. So one thing to shock it, I'm going to get my frozen bowl, is you can use ice water, you can use a cold water bowl underneath the bowl when it comes out, or you can put it directly in the fridge. I find that it raises the temperature of my fridge, so it's not really as food safe to put something super hot into the fridge. The fridge isn't too big, so it's just going to make the whole fridge warmer. So I like to shock it in an ice bath. So what I did was I got a cold bowl with a little bit of water over here. Which I should have mentioned at the beginning of our class, but it really doesn't matter. You can have just cold water in a bowl. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take this broccoli out when it's done, put it in its own bowl, strained, take this bowl and put it on top of the ice bowl. That's going to cool it quickly and retain all of those vitamins, all that color, all that flavor into the broccoli. And we're going to keep it cold until right before we're ready to serve our chicken and risotto, in which case we're going to throw it in a little pan with a little butter and salt, and it's going to be the best broccoli you've ever eaten. I promise. So taking another minute here, marrying this risotto really is something that you ought to be prepared for. So it is a bit of a time-consuming venture, but as I can see, it's starting to get almost perfect. So we're going to take that extra tasting spoon, come back to our little pan here. Perfect. So, al dente. Al dente means to the bite. So when you say pasta al dente, vegetables al dente, rice al dente, it means that when you bite into it, you should be still not crunchy, but you still should be able to have texture to it. So it's not mushy, it's not fall apart in your mouth, there's to the bite, so a little bit of a texture. So right now, mine is just about there. The moisture is basically cooked off. It's nice and creamy looking, the mushrooms are cooked. I'm gonna add my cheese. So I have about a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. I like mine cheesy. If you'd like less cheese, you can add less cheese. You might just need to add a little bit more cream. So again, it's really a play on what kind of texture you want in the end. You want it to be creamy, you want it to be flavorful, you want it to be well seasoned, but to each individual taste, you might want more cream, less stock, or more stock, less cream, or you might want it extra dangerously cheesy like I do. So I have about a 1/4 cup here. I'm gonna add all that into my risotto and stir it around. And to finish that off, I'm going to add about 2 to 3 tablespoons of cream. So we're not going too heavy on the cream here. It's just kind of a finisher to bring it all together. Adds to the flavor of the cheese and the butter and just everything. I just like that cream. Another way you can add is a little bit of cream cheese or a little bit of mascarpone. Works really well here too. cornstarch and water. Okay, first of all, thank you, Shelby. I appreciate the compliment. And Kathy, cornstarch to water. So it's about double. So I usually go, to start, I usually make the slurry about 2 teaspoons, 1.5 to 2 teaspoons. I start lighter, and then if I need to add a little bit more, I can, but about 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons of cornstarch, and so double that of water. And so I have about 4.5 teaspoons of water here. And we're gonna mix that together right before, and it should be almost sticking together. Like it shouldn't be just watery, but it should be pourable. So I'll show you when I add that when we bring the chicken out. But yeah, it's about double. So double the amount of water to the amount of cornstarch. All right, so that risotto is looking really, really nice. I'm really happy with it. I'm going to pull that off the heat, shut it right down, and I'm gonna let it sit for a couple minutes. Let it absorb all that moisture. It's gonna carry over cook, so it's important that it's al dente when we're cooking it, so that if it's getting more moist than that, it's gonna continue to cook in the heat. So we really don't want it to be overcooked. So right now it's still got a little bit of a bite, so I'm gonna put it off to the side. I'm gonna check on my broccoli over here, which has just been sitting nicely in the water. I think it needs another minute or so. I kind of cut the pieces pretty large. Again, if you have smaller little florets, you wouldn't need to cook it as long. What you're looking for is the water starting to turn a little bit green. Again, because I don't like to lose the nutritional value of my vegetables, I save this water. I save it in a jar and I use it for my stock. So instead of adding water to my stock bucket when I go to make stock, I'll use the broccoli water from the cooked broccoli. Therefore, I'm not losing any of that nutritional value that seeps out. And that's pretty much going to happen no matter how you cook vegetables. It's either going to evaporate by a steam, or it's going to get lost in the roasting, or it's going to get lost somewhere. So one way that I like to keep that incorporated into my food is I keep all that liquid, just like your grandma always keeps the potato water from the potatoes, for mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving, for the gravy. Part of that is the starch content, but also part of that is so that you don't lose out on that nutritional value. So I like to keep my water, so I'm not too concerned if it cooks a little bit longer. I just want it to be nice and al dente so that when I cook it in the pan, it's going to come out perfect, a little bit to the bite, but it's cooked well, evenly, and it's got that little bit of coating of butter. It's going to be the best broccoli you've ever had. So we're going to give that one more minute. I know we went a little bit over in time, so I hope you guys are still with me. I hope you're enjoying yourselves, and for everybody that showed up today, it means a lot to me that you could be here. It's so important that we showcase our local businesses here in the Esterhazy area and the greater Canadian small business areas, because I really do believe that we support each other through the things that we do, and we create our own local economy based on the needs of the people that live there. And as long as you guys still need to be fed and need to learn something about food, I will stay relevant and I will be here for you. So it means a lot to me that you guys are here for me. Through all the stuff that's going on right now, it has definitely not been easy on my side of the pond, as I'm sure there's different struggles for each and every one of you in your own right. So this is part of my way of, staying part of the conversation here in Esterhazy, a place that I don't think I'm ever really gonna leave. So I am hoping to stay as vibrant and available as I can to all of you. So being here with me tonight is really important. And this is my first online class, so I know it might not be quite as professional or spot on as I'd like it to be, but I want to do more in the future, and all your feedback, good or bad, is so important to how I grow and change my business. So do not hesitate. Let me know all the things I did wrong, because I can only get better by the things I do. I can only get better by the things I do wrong. You never know how wrong you are until you think you're totally right. I used to say that all the time to my staff. You never learn from the things people tell you you're doing right. You only learn from the things you screw up. So, with that in mind, I think my broccoli is about done. Before I screw it up too much, I'm going to gently drain that out, put it into my bowl here, and then I'm going to take this bowl and put it into my cold bowl. So whether that you have a second bowl that's filled with ice water, or you're going to pop it right in the fridge, we're not too far away from cooking that broccoli out, so you probably don't need to put it in the fridge for too long if you're going to do that, but we want to shock it so that we don't lose that color and nutrition. So we're going to shut that boiling water off. We're going to pop this guy into our cold water. We're going to shock that broccoli down so that it retains all of that. So while that's happening, I have this beautiful cover I like to put over top so that we can just make sure that it gets evenly chilled. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right. So this constant care and attention that we've been doing to this risotto, I'm assuming yours looks, as good as mine. It should be texturally creamy and almost like one big mass of rice stew, but at the same time, you should be able to see each individual rice in there. So I'm going to show you what I have here. Is this wonderful, beautiful risotto in the pan, nice cooked mushrooms, nice and hot still, carry over cooking a little bit here, keeping that nice little bits all together so that we have that uniform mass, but at the same time, you can each taste the individual rice pieces in there. So that is awesome. All right, I think we must be pretty darn close to carving up that bird. So I'm going to pop that out. We've got our cornstarch ready for a slurry here, and we're going to work on building that gravy. So everybody knows how to make a pan gravy, but there's always little problems that people have with the pan gravy. One of which is that it's too oily. One that I see a lot is that it didn't come together really well, or it gets too thick or it's too thin. Part of using the cornstarch slurry is it's gonna solve that in a lot of ways, because the slurry is really honestly the best way to keep that nice thickened consistency and do it gradually. Because you can add the slurry in little bits and you don't have to cook it out for as long as you do with flour, you're gonna get a more even gravy and it's gonna incorporate well. The one thing that's a downside of using a slurry is it does not freeze. So not that I'm concerned about us freezing gravy with this little bit of gravy, or that typically you'd have to worry about freezing gravy, but if it was a concern, you cannot freeze a cornstarch based gravy. It will not hold in the freezer. That being said, flour based gravy doesn't do great either, but it is better than a cornstarch gravy in the freezer. So that's something to think about. Otherwise, we're going to take a look at this chicken. To me, it's looking quite lovely. I'm going to place it just here on my pan, and I'm going to cut through that trussing string because I think we're about done. So you can temp your chicken a couple different ways. Of course, you can always use your thermometer, which I will show you how to do. Or you can do like Grandma did, and you can toss around that little leg, which is my preferred method. So it was all nicely trussed, so the legs were nice and together. If you pull that leg apart, it should come almost completely off. So see that there? I hope you guys can see that there. If I twist this leg, it's gonna pop right off. So it should be cooked all the way. If you're concerned, you can fire up that thermometer. I like to do it in two places. So most people temp inside the breast, which is okay, but doesn't necessarily give you a clear register of the overall temperature of the chicken. So looking at this in the breast, I'm already, before I let this sit, I'm already over 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So we want to be at 170 degrees Fahrenheit with our 5 minutes of resting time. So I'm already close to that. I'm at about 160 in the breast here. So with carryover, you can include about a 5 to 7 degree change. So you really don't want to overcook this bird. You really want to keep it as juicy as possible. So, don't be afraid to come close to that 165, 170 mark. You're going to let it carry over by resting for about 5 minutes. So as long as it's close to that 160 mark when you temp it, let it carry over. Let it cook out while it's sitting here. You're going to get the best quality meat. You're not going to undercook this bird. We cooked it for over 45 minutes. So with a 3.5 pound chicken, you're not going to overcook it. or you're not going to undercook it at 45 minutes. So yeah, I'm at about 160 in the breast. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit, but I also like to temp right in between by the thigh. And the reason for that is the underneath part of the bird, because of the moisture that's right underneath it, is going to cook differently, and the dark meat actually takes a little bit longer to cook. So that's why if you're cooking a turkey, sometimes to get that beautiful, well-browned outside edge of each piece of the meat, you would flip it part way. I don't love to do that because I feel like it ruins the beautiful top quality of the skin on the breast meat. But if you wanted to get it brown and to create a more uniform cooking throughout, you would want to flip that bird over part way. So right here I can see that I'm already almost 7 degrees less in temperature underneath. I'm still pushing that 155 mark, so I'm really not too worried about it coming up to the right temperature. And because I'm going to serve the breast meat to my family tonight, and then I'm going to use the rest for chicken soup, I'm really not worried about that under part being all the way up to 170. It's going to come up to close to 165 here anyway as I let it rest, so I'm not super worried. If you're serving the whole bird tonight and your favorite is dark meat, you might want to pop it in the oven for another 5-7 minutes or so, just to make sure that you get that full register. I'm going to let mine carry over and sit, and we're going to work on the grate. So I'm going to remove that little grate that we have the chicken on. And one thing that I learned about cooking gravy over the years is to keep my roasting drippings and my mirepoix in the pan. I know it seems counterintuitive, but I keep it in the pan as I cook out the gravy. So I don't have a ton of moisture here left over, which is fine because I have extra stock or water or, you know, chicken stock, whatever you have that you want to use as a little bit of extra flavor. I've even had people use apple juice to make it a little sweeter, depending on how you like your gravy. I'm going to add a little bit more stock because I want at least 2 ounces of gravy per person for my family. So I'm going to place this back on my burner, and I'm going to bring it up to high heat because I want to cook off some of that sugar from the vegetables a little bit first. And I'm going to add the rest of my stock here. Just to carry that over, just to get that nice, beautiful brown. We're going to bring that up to temperature. So we're talking about the cornstarch slurry and how that works for thickening. I got my cornstarch here, I got my water here. I'm going to add my cornstarch to my water. I'm going to whisk that up. Nice cold water, and you want to bring the pan drippings to a boil. We're going to bring that to a boil. This is nice and cold. Again, my pan tends to heat up really, really fast. Another thing you can do is you could add a little bit of your broccoli or vegetable water if you're out of stock to your gravy, like Grandma used to do. Considerable flavor. And all of these dishes that I work with, you know, my biggest thing is layering the flavor as we go. So seasoning as we go, adding all of those different pieces that we're using, all the water, all the stock, all the experience we can get out of the vegetables as we're cooking them to contribute to the flavor of this dish or my next dish, right? It's just utilizing all those pieces to build that flavor throughout, right? So depending on how we build each layer of flavor contributes to that overall well-rounded, super deep, satisfying dish, right? Instead of salting all at the end, you know, you get a very distinct difference in flavor. Instead of something tasting salty, the whole dish tastes well-rounded, right? So we kind of work as we go. All right, so that's already boiling. So my pot works, or my burner works really fast. I'm going to add all this slurry to start because I know that it's going to be just about enough to make the gravy that I want. Right to the vegetables, right to the pan, and then I'm going to whisk that in. So nice cold slurry to a nice hot pan. Vegetables are still in there. And I'm going to grab myself a tasting spoon because, like everything, before chef tastes it, you need to taste it. So the flavor is nice, but it needs a little bit extra salt. a more clear gravy, you don't have to add pepper to yours. But I like a little bit of pepper in mine. So I'm going to add a little bit of pepper now. And maybe you like to add a little bit of oregano, or maybe you like it a little spicier, you want to add a touch of cayenne. I can never get away with those crazy spices with my daughter anyway. And if I want to do anything else with my gravy other than serving it tonight with the chicken, I want to keep it a little bit more neutral so that I can add it to future recipes if I need to. So again, that slurry does not take very long to cook out. We're going to give that about 1 more minute. And then we're going to strain out the whole thing. So yes, I know it seems a little counterintuitive to strain after the fact, but while we're cooking out that gravy, we're going to still contribute some of the flavors from the vegetables if we keep the vegetables in the pan for longer. Instead of draining them out first and just working with the broth, we're going to strain it all out anyway. So the slurry will contribute to the overall consistency of the gravy. So we can strain it after we add the thickening agent, which is our slurry in this case, and still contribute to a better, more rounded flavor with all the veggies still in there. So I can see that my gravy is nice. And again, depends on how thick you like your gravy. Some people like it thicker, some people like it thinner. You might want to add a little bit more cornstarch, but for my purposes, it looks great. I'm going to strain it right out. So there we go. Got that nice pan, veggies still in there. Beautiful, beautiful gravy. We're going to strain that whole thing out in a chinois or a nice, what do you call this? Colander, nice thin colander. I'm going to strain that all out. There's a beautiful gravy right there for our chicken. Alrighty, so I can shut my oven off because I'm all good to go. We got our risotto on the back.